General Electric is the nation's largest industrial company. It employs over 300,000 people around the world. It makes everything from aircraft engines to power plant turbines to medical imaging equipment. The company has evolved over the last decade under Jeff Immelt's watch. He has led a global expansion and shed once treasured businesses such as plastics and insurance. In 2011, President Obama named him to lead the Council on Jobs and Competitiveness. Last month, the country created 146,000 jobs, exceeding expectations in the wake of Hurricane Sandy. Further progress will be tested as the fiscal cliff deadline approaches without a deal in sight yet. I'm very pleased to have Jeff Immelt back on this program. Welcome.
Hey, Charlie, thanks. Good to be back with you.
We have talked many times about GE since you took over, I think once soon after 2001. Where is the company today in terms of where you want it to be, and where do you want it to be in the next 5 years?
So I think, Charlie, what we've tried to do is simplify the portfolio into being infrastructure and financial services. We like where the portfolio is today. We think in the infrastructure space there's going to be, roughly $4 trillion spent each year. So it's an attractive, big market. Globally is where our opportunities are. So the company's, probably a decade ago, 30% of our revenues were outside the United States. Now it's more like 60 or 65%. And so we think we've got the portfolio we want. We've dramatically increased the amount of technology. And in the end, I think technology and innovation are the competitive advantage. We've got a good global footprint. We're in 140 countries. And we've got these deep relationships with customers. So I think GE is always about portfolio, technology, customers, and real innovation around services and globalization. And that's really where the company is today.
One thing you're doing is something you call the industrial internet. Business Week has a piece on that that's out on the newsstand now. What is that, and why is that so important to industry in the future?
So I think every industrial company, now with sensor technology and software technology, has to really think about the analytical layer around their products. So a jet engine or an MR scanner or a gas turbine creates terabytes of data, usage data.
Right.
Now, if we could model a jet engine that saves 1% fuel burn every year, that saves the industry $2 billion. $2 billion is a lot of money for our customers. And so we're trying to take the analytical aspects and the data and restructure it in a way that really benefits our customers. And in our world, if you think about social media was about connecting 1 billion consumers, right, and change the way they shop or do other things. The industrial internet's about really deep domain, deep verticals, where 1% of anything is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And that's the world we want to play in.
We really have come with the internet to this emphasis on data and what data can tell us. And the cloud has given us enormous potential.
Completely. Information technology in and of itself creates 5 or 10% of the value. Connectivity is only 10% of what it's all about. The rest is about better decision-making, better analytics, saving money. It's about doctors that know how to make better diagnoses. So that's really where the next wave is. That's where the action is. And I think what we're saying is, look, industrial companies stay out of that at their own peril. It no longer is a day where you say, I'm going to make the engine, and I'm going to let a software guy decide how it flies and things like that. So that's really what we're focused on.
Are there businesses that still now are in the part of GE that you want to spin off? Or do you have the core companies for the future?
Look, I think we've got the best portfolio we've had in a decade. Financial services is a lot smaller than the last time I was on your show, for obvious reasons. But we're in the range of 60 to 70% of the company's industrial, 30 to 40% is financial. That's a pretty good balance for us. So I'd say we're about where we'd like to see the company, and in places where we have real competitive advantage.
Someone once said the way to judge GE executives, this may have been one of your predecessors, is how they allocate capital and how they evaluate people.
Yep.
You agree with that?
Yeah, look, I think there's certain core competencies that go with the company that we do as a collective. Capital allocation is clearly one of them. How we develop leaders is one of them. I would say there's others. Technology development, I would say in some ways, might be as important or more important than the other two, and we do that across the company. And then I would say globalization, how we really globalize. Globalization is a big company game. I can go to China and not be afraid. I can go to Africa and compete with the Chinese. I can go to Russia and say I can manage the risk-reward equation. So, you know, that's really where a lot of new consumers are. And I would say that is a core competency of a multi-business big company like GE. So I'd say it's more than those two, but those two are important.
You once said to me, tell me where the global economy will look like and the domestic economy will look like, and I can tell you what GE will do. Look ahead to the global economy today and tell me how you see it, where it's going, and what are the prospects for growth.
So, look, I think the world always revolves around a couple fundamentals, right? One is, where are the people? You know, demographics rule. At times when the U.S. grew the fastest was times when the population was also growing the fastest. So the fact that there's 1 billion new consumers who are joining the middle class in the next 5 or 10 years, you better be with them, right?
Yes.
The second one is the cost of materials. So, you know, basically in the 90s, oil was $15 a barrel for a decade. Now it's 80 or 100 or 120. There's a massive amount of wealth that goes with where resources go and things like that. So that's number two. I'd say number three is just innovation. Where's the innovation taking place? Is it Silicon Valley? Is it Bangalore? Is it other places? So I would say demographics, natural resources, where's the innovation? That's what rules. Now, in the case of aviation, let's take that business. Revenue passenger miles are growing 4 or 5% every year. That's because people are flying around the world. But the 3 biggest airlines in the world today, if you went back 10 years, and if I said to you, the 3 biggest airlines in the world are going to be Emirates, Etihad, and Qatar Airways. All within
Immelt, you're losing it.
all within a driver and a 9-iron of each other. You know, exactly. Completely in another side of the world. Not American Airlines and stuff like that. So that's what you got to be following those trends. Now those trends don't stay the same. I would say in the case of the United States, what's different today versus 10 years ago? This is a country that's rich in energy, right? You know, the shale gas revolution is real. And so maybe you thought your energy strategy was going to take you to Africa or Saudi Arabia or other places. Now you come right back around and bring it back here, and that's a meaningful trend.
Let's talk about energy, and I'll come back to the global picture. I especially want to talk about how you see Africa and China and India. But looking at energy today, you're in the business of nuclear reactors. There are people who are saying because of these new developments in natural gas, the demand for nuclear reactors will not be the same. You buy that?
I think it's true. I mean, I think in many, you know, there's no one global answer. So the U.S. and Europe and China are going to have different strategies. But the notion that in this region, gas could be $2 to $3 per million BTU, or even $5 or $6 per million BTUs, I think shifts nuclear in this country out over a period of time. There may be a few new reactors built, but not many.
When do we have energy independence because of the online production of shale?
Here's what I would say, Charlie. You know, in other words, somebody who's smarter than I am should pick what's the right strategy. Is it independence? Is it security? Is it something like that? But between Canada, Mexico, and the United States, this region, the NAFTA region, could completely be energy independent very soon. This region could probably be the most powerful or one of the most powerful energy producing regions in the world, and the shale gas is just a game changer.
The most significant new game changer.
It is just a game. Now, is it the panacea for everything? No, but it does open up doors that didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago, and that's something that we should absolutely have high on the list of things to do.
When you see that, what could disrupt that possibility of shale gas playing the role that you see it?
Look,
what's the risk?
It exists. Right. So in other words, the seismic aspect of it is very real. So it exists. What you need to commercialize it is a set of pipelines or a set of capabilities inside a country, which the U.S. is pretty good at. You need some new demand. So are you going to convert automobiles or other things to natural gas? And then I think there's the environmental aspect. You know, nobody wants to do this in ways that harm the environment, but there's ways to solve those problems. So I'd say if you said early on, what's the biggest risk to fully developing a resource like that, it's going to be in the environmental side, because I think the other things, there's plenty of capital to solve.
So what's the possibilities for green energy and for alternative energy?
Look, the first thing I'd say is that natural gas in and of itself is inherently greener than the current installed base. So it can provide...
But you are into wind?
Yeah, no, I think wind will still continue. I think solar will still be part of the mix. You know, again, I've always advocated for very broad energy, a set of energy solutions, because you're never quite smart enough to figure out which one's going to kind of break through the door at any given point in time. But clearly gas is going to be a bigger part of the mix in the United States going forward. Now, globally, look, Japan doesn't have any gas, so they've got to figure out, you know, post-Fukushima what they do. Europe has to figure out, do they want to import gas from Russia or build nuclear? So everybody's got their own set of challenges. But I'm here to tell you that this country, unlike any other time in my lifetime, has more options that are positive than ever before.
You're bullish on America?
I think on the energy side, for sure. Yeah. And then I'd say on the one thing that never goes away in the United States is an incredible set of entrepreneurs. So I think if we can get a set of great entrepreneurs, we can go after some big opportunities like energy. There's no reason why the United States can't continue to grow.
Can manufacturing come back to America?
Look, you know, if you look, I'm a 30-year GE guy. So when I started, it was probably 25% of American jobs in manufacturing. Now it's 9%. So is it going to go back and be 25% again? Probably not. But could it be in the low teens? Yes.
Apple just announced today, I think.
Saw that. I saw what Tim did. And look, we brought jobs back to the United States. I think American workforce is very productive. I think in the sets of technologies that we make today, you can make them here. I actually think that the relationships in general between unions and business and things like that have all progressed over time, and the workforce is very productive. So there's no reason why the manufacturing base shouldn't be higher in the future, and we should make that a goal. You know, in other words, this notion, this Darwinian notion that the U.S. was going to go from farms to manufacturing to service, we were the only guys reading those books. You know, the Chinese had a book that said, don't read the American book,
exactly.
You know, because it doesn't work.
And don't read the Russian book.
Don't read the Russian book. So, you know, I think we could do a better job of manufacturing. I actually think it's quite important, and it is one of the ways you create good middle-class jobs.
Where are the jobs coming from?
Look, I think energy can provide a ton of jobs. I think housing is getting better every day, so you're gonna get some more jobs there. And I think export markets are, you know, going to continue to be pretty robust, and the U.S. can play in those places. So in the short term, that's where some of the jobs are going to be. But we're going to need more to get unemployment down to a level that society thinks is what the U.S. where the U.S. should be.
How many billions of dollars in revenue are you expecting from China?
Look, we're about 7 today. You know, it's growing about 15% a year. We can play in China. We've got probably 16 or 17,000 people in China. We're a net exporter to China, so from the U.S., so we have good technology products and things like that.
What are they buying?
Jet engines, healthcare products. You know, we'll sell more CT scanners in China this year than we will in the United States. Now, never thought I'd see that day, you know, and we're competitively advantaged, and we do a good job. And I think, you know, the goal is you want to be competitive in China, you want to play, but we like a portfolio. You know, we're big in Australia, we're big in Canada, we're big in the Middle East, we're big in Africa. I wouldn't want to have a strategy that was solely dependent on China. I like having a diversified geography.
But in the past, you've criticized doing business in China. Has it gotten better, easier from the time that you made that observation?
Look, at the time I made the observation, it was when a thing called indigenous innovation was taking place, which basically said, do business with Chinese companies,
exactly,
right? So I think,
if you want to do business here, do business with China.
And I think companies like GE need to speak up from time to time when things aren't right. You know, in other words, we've earned the right. By and large, GE's relationship in China is good. We've been a good investor for a long time. We've taken a lot of heat here in New York City and Washington, D.C. because we've stood tall as a good, honest partner with the Chinese. But what's also incumbent on you is when you've earned that position, occasionally you have to speak up, and I did.
But as you know, when you speak up about China, people also say, look at General Electric, this great American company. They're exporting jobs as well.
Look, we have jobs all over the world, right? So we are the second biggest exporter behind Boeing. We're a net exporter in every other country in the world. But we will sell more gas turbines. We have about 50% market share of the large gas turbine market. We will sell more in Algeria in the next 3 years than the United States. So what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to sit here and just say, oh, it's too hard?
And if you don't get the business, somebody else
is going to get it. Siemens, you know, we're down to the point after 130 years that basically we're the only American company left, and most of the businesses, you know, love us or hate us, we're the only American left. So I think you would be better off as an American citizen wanting GE to be able to go to every corner of the world, toe-to-toe, compete hard, than sitting here and losing market share in the places in the world that are growing. And I can tell you with great certainty, it is 100 times harder to get an order in Angola than it is in Chicago. I wish all our customers were in Chicago. I really, it is
tough.
Infinitely easier. But the places where our customers are other places, and you don't do that unless you create some jobs in other places at the same time we are here. But I'm here to tell you we're a big exporter. We'll always be a big exporter. We're a net exporter to some of the toughest places in the world. And we're a good competitive American company.
Like America's changing, China's changing. The growth rate has gone from double digits to right around 8%. It may be being stabilized now as we speak. What does that mean for China, and what does it mean for the United States? And should it change the expectations?
Look, I think it's good for China, actually. You know, to a certain extent, Charlie, 11 or 12% is unsustainable. Right. You know, you end up getting too much stimulus, or you get a misallocation of resources. They're much better off working on more of a consumer-based economy, less dependent on exports, driving technology and innovation harder. Really, the one thing that actually works, you know, state-run communism may not be your cup of tea, but their government works, you know, and they
get things done.
They have 5-year plans. I always tell our team, read the 12th 5-year plan, which is the segment we're in. Typically, what they're doing makes sense in the Chinese context. That's what they're doing now. You know, the new president comes in, Mr. Xi comes in. He's got an agenda, and they're driving environment, they're driving company reform, they're driving more consumerism that are the right things. Now, for the U.S., I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we need a relationship. We need a strong bilateral relationship with China. We do. But if you sit back, right, as an American business guy, you say basically, Europe probably has 0% growth for a long time. Japan has had 0% growth for 20 years. The U.S., you're sitting at 1.5, 1.7, maybe 2% GDP growth. If you're not willing to get off your butt and go to every corner of the world, you're going to get fired. So we got to sell all over the place. And China is valuable not just for China, but it also pulls along Brazil, Australia, every other country in the world.
And then there is Africa. You have said that Africa...
I like Africa.
Why?
There's 8 or 9 countries that have an immense amount of natural resources. They must find a way to turn that into productive economies, and that's starting. You know, some of the biggest economies that have grown the fastest in the last 5 years are in Africa. So take a place like Nigeria. Nigeria has 180 million people. They're number 6 in oil, number 7 in gas. They lack 40 gigawatts of power. So they have supply, they have demand of everything GE sells. Now, in between, it's a mess, right? In between, there's 1,000 things going on in Nigeria, but those are the kind of places, really, if you're not going to be able to sell stuff in Spain for a while, you better be in places like Nigeria that can buy your products, have the money, and you just have to drive it hard.
And the growth rate there may offer more potential than even the growth rate in China.
Look, I think to a certain extent, really...
Because the base is so low.
The bases are low. The growth rates are higher. And when I go to Africa, there's no local competition. I'm competing with Siemens and not China South Rail.
Right.
So I've got a different competitive mix. And so we've always looked at the world of... We've always wanted to be big and competitive in China. But our top priority has always been the resource-rich countries of, you know, Middle East Africa, Australia, Canada, Latin America, Africa.
Do you worry about how aggressive the government of China is in going to all those countries?
Oh, sure. But that's what I try to convey here. You know, I try to convey when I'm in Washington, look, globally, we're not playing tiddlywinks here. You know, we're playing against really tough competitors. Now, we don't need the U.S. government to do what the government of China does. We really don't. We just need the State Department to have eyes open to try to open up doors for Caterpillar and GE, not pick winners and losers, but to try to, and at the end of the day, look, I like my chances in Africa against all comers. They like the United States, they like the way we do things, we train people, we invest in countries, they like that.
On the question of what the U.S. government should do, is there anything that this government should do, or any government, whether it's the Obama administration or some future administration, ought to do in terms of U.S. companies being more competitive internationally? Or you want them just to stand out of the way?
Look, I think they can be, I don't think we need the same levels of investment support that even Germany and Japan have. But the fact that Secretary Clinton has been very pro-business, that the State Department opens up doors, that the President publicly says, look, I want to double exports, that the U.S. is very aggressive in trying to do that, I just think the attitude helps us all. You know, it's really a, you know, when Chancellor Merkel flies from Berlin to Beijing, 20 CEOs get off right behind her, and they've got their hands out, right? Yeah. And they're saying, give me more business. And we don't need to do it exactly that way, but we need the administration, every administration, to be out there selling with us as we go around the world. And look, for every job that we have in exports, there's another 8 in the supply chain. I mean, every small and medium supplier benefits as we go sell.
You mentioned the President. You have developed, how would you characterize the relationship? Because you're on the Jobs and Competitiveness Commission, you're on the Debt Commission. He clearly respects you. What's the relationship?
I think strong, very strong mutual respect. In a way that we can communicate and things like that. So I'd say deep personal respect.
And if he would call you up and say, I need you for my second term?
I'd say, I've had the honor of serving you already, Mr. President, and it's a good time to...
But, you know, it's hard to turn the President down.
Look, I mean, I think he's going to have a very deep bench, and my strong commitment is to GE.
And you're going to evade the question.
Exactly. Exactly.
But your sense of him, you know, some people speculate that you were disappointed in the way he handled the economy.
So, you know, here's what I would say. I think he became president at a very tough time, right, 2008. And I would say it was at a time when business wasn't at its peak. Right? It was a time when business was highly disliked, coming out of the financial crisis.
Both Wall Street and...
Everybody, really. I mean, I just think we all got painted with whatever brush was out there. That's
but was he part of that, in a sense, of painting
I think
he
inherited it when he came in. I think, you know, and I think we have to take 50% of the blame and responsibility in that. I think business guys would have liked to have seen maybe different priorities at times.
Like,
you know,
what? Because you're on the round table, too.
We're working harder on the regulatory front.
Right.
You know, some things versus health care. But I'd sit here and say, look, came in at a tough time, a time when business was viewed as part of the problem, not part of the solution. We've gotten to where we are today. I think business deserves its share of the blame. And, you know, when I worked with him on the Jobs Council, I think on specifics, he was fantastic and was a great listener, was highly engaged with the work that the Jobs Council did, took action on the recommendations that we put forward. And, you know, that's more or less what I judge. I really think, Charlie, you know, there are plenty of people that are mean to CEOs. You know, in other words, we don't need to be patted on the head like, good boy, you know, I really like you and stuff like that. That's not really, you know, in the end, we like growth and we like competitiveness. And we like people that help us work on growth and competitiveness.
And this president helps you work on growth and competitiveness?
And I think in a second term, you know, we can do a lot.
What is your hope for the second term? And first, before we go there, let's go to the fiscal cliff. What do you think ought to come out of an agreement between the President and John Boehner?
So I'd make a couple comments. You know, the first one is, we got to get this done now. Not, you know, there are people that will write or go on news shows and say, we can let it lapse 2 weeks or something like that. That is specifically not true. We need this to get resolved now. Not because Jim McNerney will say it or Jeff Immelt will say it, but because the millions of people that work for us, their lives are in flux. And this is incredibly critical that we get it done now. We need revenue.
Right.
Everybody knows we need revenue. I think
so. The president is right in asking for more revenue and therefore not extending the Bush tax cuts to those who more than $250,000.
Bull Simpson, there's not been one commission that says we can do this just on spending cuts. Right. There's going to have to be revenue. I think Speaker Boehner is the only guy that can lead us in that.
Right.
He is the only guy that can lead us.
He's got to take the Republicans to the House of Representatives.
He's got to take the heat, and I trust that he can do it. You know, in other words, I think
you're urging him to do it,
and we are
make a deal.
What we're trying to do is
allow
urge him to
increase
do
in the rates.
A market credible deal in his own way. I don't think we want to negotiate for him. I don't think it helps him. I don't think that helps the president. Really, what I would say is we trust Speaker Boehner to do it, and he shouldn't spend 1 minute using political capital to keep my rates low. You know, in other words, but I trust him. He's a good guy, and he can get this done.
And you trust the president?
I trust as well. He's been extremely focused and clear that he thinks we need entitlement reform, and we need to get on it in a meaningful way. So you've got two guys that have to negotiate things that are both hard for their bases. And they have to do it more or less in real time, and they have to do it now. And then what I'd say, Charlie, coming out of this into the future is we need tax reform. You know, if the forecast of the CBO is that the economy grows 3.5% for the next 10 or 15 years. Today we're growing 1.5%.
Exactly.
If that 3.5, instead of being 3.5, is 2.5, we still have a $4 trillion problem. So we need growth.
Over 10 years.
Over 10 years, right? So we need to be working on things that drive growth and competitiveness as time goes on as well.
And what is it that drives growth and competitiveness?
Look, I think it gets down to, I actually think simplification and corporate tax reform.
Right.
I think really looking at regulatory structures, educational structures, things like that.
But that costs money.
Just need to be revisited. Yeah. And look, I think we've got to get kind of the $4 trillion thing behind us. Oh. And then, but it's not like government shouldn't invest in anything. I would tell you, one of the things that has come out of every jobs council I've been a part of that is almost universal in the BRT is that this country needs to invest in infrastructure. Now this is something where the president and the BRT, jobs councils all agree, but it runs into problems because what's the funding structure going to be? How do we pay for it and things like that? But that's
essential for growth, and growth is the essential thing. You're saying.
Look, what I'm saying is
build the infrastructure, build the education.
Anybody that doesn't think that once we do this $4 trillion down payment, that growth isn't the most important thing is crazy. And so that's what we got to be looking at for broader tax reform.
And Simpson-Bowles is a good guideline, you think?
Look, I think Simpson-Bowles is a great starting point. Yeah. And like I said, you've got two guys who really have to make this happen, and we should do whatever we can to make their jobs more straightforward.
And for those who say we can go over the fiscal cliff and it might not be such a bad thing, you say?
I say there are people that don't have anybody that works for them. You know, in other words, we haven't been on this for 2 weeks or 2 days or 2 months. We've been working on this for 2.5 years. What happened in July of 2011 was ugly. You know, I read stories now to say, you know, the president lost, or he shouldn't have done this, or Speaker Boehner done that. They both failed. You know, nobody won on that moment in time. It hurt us inside the country. It hurt us outside the country. So I would say that if this goes into next year, we ought to consider that failure. We ought to get these guys to do a deal that they know they can do, and we got to get them to do it now. And this is not just Jeff Immelt of GE speaking. This is really, I would say, the business community almost universally speaks with one voice that this needs to get done. It needs to get done now. And moving into next year is just failure.
I don't know of any CEO who knows more about the world because of how much you travel and how many countries you have business in. What's the impression of the United States in those countries, because you meet with the leaders of these countries as well as their establishment? What are they saying about us? Clearly they're saying get your financial house in order.
So I think the first thing is they like President Obama. They just do. You know, he is a beloved figure in almost every corner of the world. So I would start with that. And Secretary Clinton, you know, they are highly respected, highly admired in every corner of the world, and that helps. There's nothing wrong with that. Number two, I would say American entrepreneurship and capitalism is still the model that people, you know, want. And the third thing I'd say is the politics in the U.S., as seen from afar, are ugly, are brutally ugly. And
they wonder why America can't deal with its problems and has gridlock in Washington.
I think people look at that and say, this is a country that's so admired. Why can't we do, why can't people just compromise and get along and things like that? And I would go beyond that to say, the dollar is the reserve currency. Every American benefits from that. Every American. 300 million plus of us all benefit from the fact that we're the reserve currency. Now, you default on your debt or you lose your debt ratings a few times. That's not going to be the case, and you lose that in a minute. That doesn't something that erodes over a decade. And so we can't take that for granted. That is an important aspect.
What do you think they want us to do in terms of the exercise of American power?
Geopolitics and military, there are other people that you're going to interview that are smarter about that than I am. But let me just make a point on job creation and economics. I went on a mission with Senator McCain and Senator Kerry to Tunisia and Egypt in the summer of 2011. These guys need jobs. Russia needs jobs. China needs jobs. India needs jobs. Brazil needs jobs. Thailand needs jobs. Vietnam needs jobs. America needs jobs. Really, that is the currency of power today, is innovation, is economics. And I say this, there's a ton of people that disagree. Anybody, no matter where you are, China, India, any place else, you root for a weak America at your own peril. We are the biggest market. I don't think people really root against our market. So American power gets elevated when our economy does better, when we're creating our own jobs, when we're self-confident again. So that brings me back to, the president's second term. Look, this is an incredibly smart, tough-minded, good leader. I think people, maybe even CEOs like me, way underestimated this guy, okay? But in the second term, I think we all need to work together to drive competitiveness and economic growth. And I think that'll help our geopolitics. It'll help the mood of the nation. And I think the president recognizes that. I hope he does. I think he does.
Okay, but let me just nail that down. You seem to be saying this is a really smart guy. This is a guy that's admired around the world. This is a guy that dealt a bad hand with the economy. And this is a guy who's going into the second term. And therefore, you say to your business leaders around, part of the roundtable and other important business institutions, you're saying, how do we figure out how to support this guy in terms of supporting America?
Exactly.
That's your message.
No, and I think that's the way we all feel.
So down on
him. Business guys, the day after election, right? I still had 300,000 people working for me the next day, Yeah. So you got to get up and say, hey, let's go. Where do we go next? Business guys have short memories, and it's what happens next is much more important than what's happened last, and we all believe that. Now, my experience with the president is, look, I personally think, and let's take financial services out of it. I personally think that nobody in the world copies our regulators anymore in this country. Nobody. Because they view them as being complicated, overlapping, and things like that.
No, but nobody around the world is designing a regulatory program for their country.
That looks like
America as a model.
Anymore, right? So I come to the president, let's say, either in the Jobs Council or privately, and say, look, we need to reform the EPA, let's say. Now, he's going to disagree with that, right? But when we came to him as a Jobs Council and said, here's 30 or 35 big infrastructure projects that if we can move the cycle time from 7 years to 1 year, we can create jobs. He approved them all. He made them all happen. So we got to look for some small victories that don't take on these deep philosophical divides and just makes the country more competitive. And I think in that regard, the president is a exceptional problem solver in dealing with specifics. We made 60 recommendations on the Job Council that required executive order. We did 54. We made 30 recommendations on things that took legislation. We did 4. Okay, so that's
the comment is heard occasionally. The president believes that government ought to do the job rather than the private sector, and you're here saying that the president is not of that persuasion, that he wants the private sector to do what it can?
I think the president knows that the private sector has if you want to drive growth and competitiveness, if you think that's the problem you're trying to solve, unfortunately, you got to come through. You may not like us today, but you're going to have to work with us. And I think the president recognizes that. I just think the point is, if you make a frontal assault And it doesn't matter, you could take on anybody on stuff that people philosophically believe in. They're not going to say yes on day one. But that doesn't mean there are dozens of things we can and should engage in where the president will engage. And that's what business has to be focused on. And by the way, Charlie, at the end of the day, what you really want me doing is selling jet engines. You know, we're having a nice dialogue, but really, this is not the way I want to spend time, and not the way you want me to spend my time.
Indeed. But let me go to how your tenure at the company for a few minutes here. There's no longer NBC. There's no longer insurance. There is no longer plastics. There is a GE Capital that is much smaller because you found yourself in 2007 and 8 too heavily invested in GE Capital. Which of those decisions, I mean, give me a sense of what you felt like you had to change and why in the last 10 years.
I'd say the world of competitiveness always changes, and the world of opportunity also changes. So in the case of businesses like insurance, I just didn't think we were very good. I remember you know, the 9/11 tragedy, and we took $1 billion write-off in our insurance business. And I was going through this incredible time, and for the $1 billion write-off, we took premiums of like $7 million. And I just, you know, like, note to self, get out of insurance, you know. And so,
the math didn't work.
You know, the math, you know, so I think in each disposition, we just felt like the competitiveness nature changed, and then we took that capital, and you know, when I was first became CEO, our oil and gas business was a $500 million business. Now it's a $15 or $16 billion business. Our aviation business doubled in size. Our healthcare business is bigger. So we redeploy and we get ourselves into businesses that we think are better for where the future is going to go.
And GE Capital, do you take some of the blame for how significant GE Capital had become?
No, I think, look, the mistake I made was I let it become too big. Now, look, our write-offs, now you have the benefit of looking back 5 years. Our write-offs are a lot less than banks. We didn't do the exotics and things like that, but the mistake that I made is we let it get too big in terms of the relative size and the prospect of the company.
What are the lessons to be learned from the subprime crisis and the economic crisis that this country had to go through? And
listen harder. Listen, and, you know, just be more. I'd say I'd make two comments, Charlie. The first one is more of a macro comment. You know, Brazil's a great place. The CEOs in Brazil are my friends. They're quite good. If you ask the CEO of Brazil, how did you become so good? He said, because I was CEO from 1990 to 1995, inflation was like 100% a day. I used to bring cash to the bank in a gym bag. And I became better because of those years.
So you learn lessons in hard times.
The one thing I'd say to all Americans is, you know, you may not like us, but your CEOs are better than they were in 2007, 2008, number one. Number two, humility. Ask better questions and listen harder. You know, in retrospect, if you look at the amount of leverage we added to the American system between the 1990s and 2000, the fact that we had the global economy is $60 trillion, the market for credit default swaps was $65 trillion, unregulated. It's probably not the right way to go. We just, as a system of which GE was a part, we just didn't ask tough enough questions. And we didn't push hard enough. And you know what, in financial services, do I like everything that's happened from a regulatory standpoint? No, but we deserve it. You know, we should keep our mouth shut. We deserve it.
Fair enough.
And that's where we are.
Yeah. So you deserve it because you let things get out of hand and there was no regulation, or at least regulation that was there wasn't enforced. But you're dissatisfied with Dodd-Frank in terms of being the perfect solution.
Look, I think at the end of the day, having so many agencies that overlap, in the end, isn't good for the country. It's probably not good for the industry, but you're not going to see GE at the front of that line. You know, in other words, we're gonna learn what we learned. We're gonna keep our mouth shut. We've made GE Capital better, and we're gonna be good stewards like we've always been. And we're not a perfect 130 years old. We're not perfect, but we learn our lessons well.
A lot of people now talk about the public-private cooperation as something that has to be part of the future. You buy that
completely. No, look, I just think we've got to be part of this system. Now, I'll give you some examples. Look, we work exceptionally well with governors. Governors are exceptionally entrepreneurial. Haley Barbour in Mississippi and John Hickenlooper in Colorado. And these governors are awesome. And we work with them every day. But I think, you know, if you want to get cost and quality into healthcare, if you want to fix education in this country, if you want to drive energy we can help massively. I take healthcare. Look, we've got a framework in place called the Affordable Care Act, whatever you want to call it, but if business participates to really try to drive cost and quality, this system is going to be a lot better than if we stand on the sidelines and don't participate. And so I think business
Meaning what about healthcare reform?
Oh, look, we still have...
You got to be a voice in trying to figure out what the best possible system is?
Look, the Secretary of Health and Human Services can cut reimbursements that Medicare pays. That cost just flows over to private industry, right? So unless we are on our game, the cost of healthcare is not going to go down. And so I think there are these big national issues that companies like GE can solve. Now, the last point I'd make, never be mistaken. I'm proud to be an American. GE is proud to be an American company. We wave our flag in 140 countries around the world, but we are proud to be an American company, and we're proud to be a part of this. And we know that over our tenure, that being in this great economic system has been a treasure and something that we can't take for granted.
There's this one question, you alluded to it earlier. What is the realistic expectation of the growth of the U.S. economy? It's below 2%. I mean, and I've had people say to me, smart people say...
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think there's all kinds of theories. I sit back and say, what are the fundamentals on demographics, productivity, innovation, energy? So we need to let the population grow. We need immigration reform. We need to capture energy. That might be worth a point of GDP. We need to have an entrepreneurial structure that's not impaired by regulations and things like that. I think if you do those things, you're going to get growth that's back up to 3 and 3.5%. And the arithmetic doesn't work at 2% GDP growth. Exactly. None of this arithmetic works, right? We could put Speaker Boehner and the President in a dungeon for a year. And they're not going to solve it at 2% GDP.
If the growth in GDP is 2%.
Completely. Yeah.
Stock price. What was the stock price when you took over?
In the high 30s.
And it's now what?
About 21 bucks.
What do you attribute that to?
Well, the PE's gone from a 50-plus PE to we're at 12 PE on next year's earnings. I think, Charlie, the financial service industry probably, or GE Capital probably had a market cap in and of itself that was 20 bucks a share, or 15 to 20 bucks a share. So that's completely... So I would say, in general, all PEs have come down. And if you've been in financial services over the last decade, you just have gotten hammered, and I think those two things have done as much to contribute. Look, we are have expanded earnings in a very good trajectory out of the crisis. 2012 will probably be the 4th best year in the company's history. 2013 will be better. So it's never been about earnings.
Then the market doesn't get the future of GE?
Look, I just think...
they've assigned you a PE that's real or unreal?
We are in a PE that probably trades at a premium to our peers, right? So sometimes you trade at a 50, sometimes you trade at a 12. I wish I could control. 50 was more fun, but 12 is where we are. 12 is where we are today. So that's I think that's where. In the end, the best thing I can do for GE investors is grow our earnings and cash flow, which we've done. Distribute cash. Our dividends have always been good and are growing again. And these things get sorted out as time goes on.
Because of the world that I know, why did you sell NBC?
Look, we ran out of good ideas. In other words, we're an operating company. We're not a holding company. When I go to an oil and gas review, I have 1,000 ideas. When I go see our healthcare business, I have 1,500 good ideas. Yeah. At the end of NBC, I would say, make better shows and buy more cable. I just wasn't good. I didn't have 52. I didn't have 52 good ideas. I had 2, right? Yeah. And so I think it's just you gotta be self-reflective, and I haven't regretted it a minute. Again, I have tremendous respect and love and admiration for the people in the business.
It wasn't your management, it was the nature of the business, or was it your management?
Look, I think we did Harry Potter, we did the Olympics, we did the NFL, we did The Voice, we did cable. All those things were investments we made.
This has been a good ride for you.
Yeah.
I mean, you love the job.
Yeah.
The hardest thing, I assume, was, one, the dividend announcement. and not meeting expectations for a quarter. What do you wake up and say when you know you've got to make that call?
Oh, look, I'd say cutting the G dividend was the worst day of my life. I just hated myself. I felt like I'd let so many people down. I had said I wouldn't do it. I was so incredibly disappointed in myself. I'll never forget it, Charlie, as long as I live. But it was what I had to do for the company at that moment in time. And I just think the strength of will to get up the next day and to face your team with a smile on your face, quiet confidence, and go forward. That's why we have these jobs. Really, in the good days, they're not that hard to manage. You know, I've got a ton of good people that work for me that could run GE in the good days. It's those bad days where you actually need somebody to step up and take the heat. And it's seared in my soul. And investors should know that I will work my butt off for the rest of my life. And you know, really, I think you can make people like, you know, if you don't make the tough decision at the right time, you're gonna lose your company. But if you make it and persevere, so, people will like you again someday.
Maybe not that day, but someday.
Not that day. You're gonna have one day. If you do these jobs a long time, you're gonna have 1 or 2 days where everybody hates you.
You want to do this for a long time?
Look, I've got a high motor for it. I love it. I love the company. I'm completely committed. There'll be a right time to leave. You know, the board and I talk about that. But for right now, I just I have a real passion for the job, and I love the company.
We've talked about Chinese leaders who look, you know, leader after leader. They know and set it in motion. Have you done that at GE?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
You know who your heir might be.
You know, we've got a list of folks. I know if something happened to him tomorrow, who would be the leader. We know the people that when you look out 3, 5, 10 years, who's around, and we've got a great bench. And look, we're a company where, you know, nobody's name is above the door. This is a company where the company comes first. Everybody that walks through the door at GE knows 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for as long as you work here, the company comes first.
What's the most important lesson you have learned that you might go back to Harvard Business School and say, you know, in the last 10 years, I came to a job and I came at a perilous moment to the nation's psyche. And I look now in 2011, we've got some financial challenges, but it's a remarkable country. This is what I want to teach you. If I have one last opportunity to talk to future business leaders about what it means to be a business leader in 2013.
I think it's humility and humility,
right,
and the curiosity that comes with it. You know, in other words, the big mistakes you make is when you stop asking questions. But if you're hungry and humble, and you're always digging for that extra piece of knowledge, that's how the world works.
And where do you find that? How do you go about making sure that you are replenishing at every moment your own awareness, not just with knowledge?
Travel constantly. See people constantly. Work retail. You know, Charlie, look, I see
you. Work retail.
I see you, you know, occasionally at the Microsoft conference or stuff like that.
Right.
You know, I'm there to learn. I'm there to work retail. You know, I've now done this 11 years. I've been in every CEO's office. I'm on the road 60% of the time. I don't really go to a lot of conferences. I do retail, and I work it hard. And I think you got to have your mind open. You've got to constantly be curious. You got to be getting input from 22-year-olds as well as 62-year-olds. You got to be doing it, and you got to have a high motor for all of that. And you've got to be, you know, you just can't sit back and say, you know, gosh, these real estate values are awfully high. You know, I hope nothing bad happens. You know, or you know, nervous laughter is a bad strategy. And I think the more humble you can be, and the more curious you can be, those are the traits of exceptionally successful business leaders.
Is there a skill that you wish you'd had that you had to learn to acquire?
I think the one thing CEOs never know when they get the job is just context. It's how you fit with the world. And that's something you can only learn the hard way, and that's something that's hard to teach. You know, when I became CEO of GE, I knew basically how to run a company. I knew basically how to run businesses. I was a pretty good business guy. But it's not until you're alone that you really understand how your company fits with the world, and that's continuous process. And you go through these, kind of economic times like we've had the last decade, and it's just, I think the difference maybe so few things are, you wake up one morning and Fukushima disaster's taking place, right? Now, the night before I went to bed, I wasn't thinking about Japan. I wasn't thinking about nuclear power. And now it's all consuming. And it just seems like we're in a period of time that's volatile from a geopolitical standpoint. It's volatile from an environment, nature standpoint. And you better be a business leader that's pretty fast on your feet, or else you're not going to do very well.
When I talk to political leaders, especially, and I say, what have you learned operating at a certain level? They always say to me, you say retail, they say to me it is relationships. Relationships, in the end, make a huge difference. It's trust. You see it at on the part of presidents. You see it in terms of people I've talked to, been Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. Bob Gates recently, in a conversation with me, a very good Secretary of Defense, said to me, the thing you learn is that you need quickly to cultivate and devote time to relationships because you realize you're in this together.
Completely agree. And I would say, if anything, the pendulum is coming back harder in that direction.
Meaning what?
Meaning coming out of the crisis, I think there's less trust in general.
It's part of the problem in Washington.
Exactly.
No trust.
And so you value the relationships, very much. And so, there are hundreds of CEOs who I know, who I can pick up the phone, and they trust GE. And they trust GE because they know me or they know my team and stuff like that. And I think that's immensely valuable. And, I think in the end, it's important that business leaders and politicians have a better sense of trust than maybe what we've had over the last 5 years. And again, those things never work unless you assume you're 50% of the problem. That's what you gotta,
assume you're 50% of the problem.
In other words,
I'm not blameless.
Yeah, no, completely. There's two kinds of advice you can give, and this is what I try to do with the president. One is, here's what you should do. And the other one is, here's what I would do if I were you. Turns out the latter is 100 times more valuable than the former, right?
If you say to him, here's what I would do if I was you, because he knows that you are giving it the most crucial analysis.
Yeah, and I'm not...
Because it affects you directly.
And people are never going to believe this, Charlie, but, believe it or not, the 25 people that worked on the Job Council weren't there selling their own book of business. They were there legitimately trying to help the country. And that's kind of like, it is possible to be a global CEO and still love your country. And I can manage that paradox okay. It's not always easy, but I can manage that paradox okay.
You're glad you took those jobs?
I really am. I'm not saying that it was easy, but I really liked the people on the council. We had a number of small business people, a woman named Darlene Miller and a guy named Chris Che. I love these guys. I thought they were awesome. I got to know Paul Otolini and Ellen Kuhlman. Look, Rich Trump and I aren't going to be like having dinner together every night.
Yeah, that's right.
But I have great appreciation.
But you now understand where he comes from.
I have great appreciation
and he has a different political view.
For where Rich comes from, and who his constituents are. So I think that was very valuable. And like I said, I think... at a tough time, we're able to make a small difference, and that's what we're trying to do.
We're all in the same boat.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, Charlie. Thanks.
Jeff Immelt, CEO of General Electric. Thank you again.
Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.